The counterculture of the 1960s. What is counterculture? Counterculture is a term used to describe hippies who were all about peace and love. They embraced the nonconformist movement of the 50s and philosopher Timothy Leary's quote, "Tune in, turn on, and drop out." The hippie culture. This was known as the era of illegal drugs, outrageous clothing, and rock and roll. The Haight-Ashbury area of San Francisco was the capital of hippies since California did not outlaw hallucinogenic drugs until 1966. Decline of the hippies. Unfortunately, only after a few years, the hippie culture began to die out to disillusionment and violence. Drugs are primarily to blame as it killed off rock idols such as Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix by 1970. Counterculture spreads from the UK. The whole idea of the counterculture came from the United Kingdom in the early 60s. After the initial creation of counterculture, it began to spread to the United States and the rest of the Western world. What did the counterculture consist of? The counterculture mostly consisted of young adults and youth who were frustrated with the traditional American way. They rejected the traditional values of American society and the culture within. The acts of the counterculture. The counterculture's population were into nonviolent protests that were against racism, gays, lesbians, bisexuality, but this all ended up turning violent in the end when no one would listen to them. Art during the 1960s. Art had a huge impact on life during the 1960s. Andy Warhol, who was known for his bright and colorful and commercial-looking artwork, led the way in defining art during the 1960s with his work. Rock and roll. Rock and roll was huge during the 50s and then carried even further into the 60s. The counterculture embraced rock's biting and loud protests. The Beatles took mainstream America by storm, gathering over millions of rock fans over the course of the 60s. Conservatives versus counterculture. Nixon was a huge Republican who was actually against countercultures. Others defined counterculture as a form of anarchy that would end up destroying the United States. As we all know, this never happened. Counterculture and LGBT. The counterculture also benefited the LGBT community as well as civil rights activists. Many protests made by counterculture people were for the rights of LGBT individuals and minorities. Same-sex marriage and legalization. Same-sex marriage became more widely accepted after the effects of the counterculture movement. This led to the legalization of same-sex marriage in many states during the 1960s. Lasting legacy. The counterculture movement would forever change the ideas of Americans. The racial segregation was outlawed during this period, and Americans began to see a purpose in what they did.